Peace be upon you, class. I am Munir Biruk, the instructor of this course, Readings. This is the second part of a lecture about Dante Alighieri's The Divine Comedy. In this presentation, we'll zoom in on the fifth canto in the poem. So what we'll do is just to go through some extracts from this canto, just to have a basic idea of what the Divine Comedy is about. So this is not meant as a close reading or an in-depth analysis. So let's review some of the points we talked about in the previous presentation. We said that the Divine Comedy is an epic poem, and we talked about some of the characteristics of epic poetry. So go back to the presentation to review, to refresh your minds. And we also said that the Divine Comedy is divided into three main parts. The first is Inferno or Hell. The second part is Purgatio or the Purgatory, and the third part is Paradiso or Paradise. Well, as I said, in this presentation we'll go through some extracts from the fifth canto, which is located in the first part of the Divine Comedy, in Inferno or Hell. But before we proceed, it's very important to have an idea of how Dante imagines hell, how he conceives of its place, its geography, and its characteristics. I should also insist here that Dante's conception of hell does not necessarily correspond to how hell really is. For us Muslims, and I suppose for Christians as well, only God knows the truth and the reality of hell, of paradise, and of the hereafter generally. So for Dante, hell is located in the earth. After he met Virgil, you remember, they descended down the earth and they went through the stages of hell. Hell is composed of 9 concentric circles, that is, circles which partake of the same center. And the residents of hell fall into 3 types of sinners, and they are guilty of 3 types of sins. The first type of sins is incontinence, or the sins of incontinence. Incontinence means the inability to control oneself and to restrain oneself from falling into or just committing the sins of desire mainly. The second type of sins is violence, and this is self-explanatory. Violence can be violence against God, violence against the others, or violence against oneself, such as committing suicide, for example. The third type of sins are the sins of fraud, that is, sins of deception, of cunning, of betrayal. Something else also to retain here is that the 9 circles of hell do not represent the same degree of punishment. So the intensity of punishment increases and gradually increases as you go downhill and as you move down the circles of hell. That is to say that the ninth circle of hell is the most intense and severe. The last thing to say here is just the center, down the center of hell is where we encounter Lucifer, or Satan, who was said to be thrown from paradise down hell, down the earth, where he formed what we call hell, and he formed down in its center, he formed a pit where he resides, and half covered with ice. Well, the 3 animals which we encountered in the first canto, we still remember, might represent these 3 types of sins, and it depends on our reading of the the animals and how they correspond to each one of these sins. Well, this is a representation of hell. We saw all that. We saw that already. And this is another representation or painting of hell, which goes back to the 16th century. As Virgil proceeded with Dante into hell, they read this inscription on its gate, on the gate of hell: "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." This is quite scaring, isn't it? What circle of hell does Dante talk about in the fifth canto? The fifth canto is allocated for for talking about the second circle and its residents. But we should note here that before Dante and Virgil arrived at the second circle, they passed through the first circle, or as it is called sometimes, the vestibule or the limbo. Limbo is reserved for those individuals who are non-Christians, but they are nevertheless good-natured and virtuous. Their sin is that they did not believe in Christianity. Some of whom, in fact, lived even before the advent or the coming of Christianity. And we as Muslims should be surprised to know that one of the residents of the first circle, where there is almost no punishment, is Saladin or Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, which is quite generous from Dante. What group of sinners is this level of hell is reserved for? I came into a place mute of all light, which billows as the sea does in a tempest, if by opposing winds it is combated. The infernal hurricane that never rests hurtles the spirits onward in its rapine, whirling them around and smiting it molests them. I understood that unto such a torment the carnal malefactors were condemned, who reason subjugate to appetite. So the residents of the second circle of hell are carnal malefactors. These are sinners who could not restrain themselves from falling into sin, into sins of flesh. This is what carnal means. Sinners who could not restrain themselves from submitting to their lower instincts, to their desires, to their to lust, to sexual desires mainly. These are sinners who could not or who were not able to respond to the call of reason, and who preferred or just submitted to their appetites at the detriment of the call and the light of reason. How are the lustful being punished in the second circle of hell? So it's very important also to remember that each circle of hell displays a different kind of punishment. Punishment which corresponds to the type of sins which these individuals committed in their lives. As far as the lustful in the circle are concerned, they were subject to as far as the lustful sinners in the second circle of hell are concerned, they are, according to Dante, subject to opposing winds, to strong hurricanes, to powerful whirlwinds which shake them from one side to the other, back and forth, either downward, upward, just as they were shaken by desire in their lives, just as they could not withstand the lure of their lower instincts of sexual desires, and they stood weaker before these desires. in their lives, so they are here in the hereafter, subject to these powerful winds, in face of which they stand impotent. And remember that according to Dante, there is no hope, no repose of even escaping punishment. This is a representation of punishment, but in a different circle of hell, not the second circle. Can you identify any historical figures in this canto? Well, we as foreign students of English literature, and we are not supposed to be familiar with Western culture, but we can still spot some names which are familiar to us, and I suppose many of you would spot or just will locate the name of Cleopatra on the spot. But in this canto, Dante brings the names of a couple of historical figures who are, according to him, guilty of submitting to their sexual desires, who all of whom engage in sexual relationships which are out of wedlock, out of the institution of marriage, and all of whom surprisingly are queens, and some of them are historical leaders, and some of the critics even call this canto the canto of the queens. Some of them are Semiramis, maybe if I still remember, this is the queen of Babylon, Cleopatra, the queen of ancient Egypt, or the last queen of ancient Egypt, pharaonic Egypt, Helen of Troy, and Achilles, also one of the military leaders, Greek military leaders. Dante depicts the story of two characters. Who are they? Why they are here or there in the second circle of hell? So after mentioning the adulterous historical figures we saw in the previous slide, Dante focuses on the story of two lovers, Francesca and Paul. Paul's name, which is not mentioned here, and those lovers, both of them are married, but both of them submitted to sexual desires out of wedlock, that is, out of the institution of marriage. There is a method, as Shakespeare said, as to how Dante structures his cantos. So generally speaking, Dante would first present the big picture, that is the sinners and the type of punishment to which they are subject, and describe that. Then he gives examples and names of some historical figures, as we saw previously, Cleopatra, Helen of Troy, and then he would zoom in on a specific story which he would lay out in some detail. The case here is Francesca da Rimini and Paolo. After encountering all of these historical figures, Dante then saw Francesca and approached her. He probably knew her beforehand. He asked her why she's here and what brought her to hell, to which she replied with an eloquent and impassioned speech about love. It is love which sparked a sexual desire, and which was the cause behind the sin she and Paolo committed. Francesca delivered her speech with intense emotions and with remarkable eloquence. You see how she starts every stanza with the word love, love that kindles quick in the gentle heart, love that excuses no one loved from loving, love led us straight to sudden death together. And we call this technique anaphora, the technique of starting every sentence or stanza with the same word again and again, and it has a rhetorical effect which is meant to influence the reader or the audience. If you still remember, Martin Luther King used the same technique in his famous speech, I have a dream. I have, every now and then he starts with the same phrase, I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream. Once again, we call this technique anaphora, and it is meant to influence the reader. And yes, it did. Francesca's speech influenced and kind of deceived Dante, the character, who described her speech as sweet thoughts, which brought painful tears to his eyes. He kind of sympathized with her, forgetting even that she is a sinner which deserves to be in hell. Who is responsible, according to Francesca's speech, who is responsible for the sin she committed? Did she admit her responsibility for the sin which she committed with Paolo? Well, the answer is, well, who is responsible for Francesca's sin? Does Francesca admit her responsibility for the illicit relationship which she had with Paolo? Well, the answer is no. Instead, Francesca attributed the illicit affair which she had with Paolo to a book about love which they read together. The book was well known in the medieval ages and comprises scenes of love and illicit relationships. And when they came up on a scene in which the two lovers in the book kissed each other, Paolo, her lover, to whom she referred with this one. Okay, you could notice that she always refers to her lover not by name but this one, who shall never leave my side, that is, who is tormented and punished just on my side. So her lover Paolo was provoked by the scene they read in the book, and kissed her mouth. Our girl was that book and he who wrote it. So Francesca doesn't assume responsibility for the sin which she committed. It was the fault of the book and its author. It is the book which triggered and provoked Paolo and Francesca to kiss each other, and later on to engage in an illicit sexual affair. And this is indeed what all of us do from time to time. We try to throw responsibility on other things or other people, assuming responsibility is a virtue which is quite very rare in human beings. It is Dante's reaction after listening to Francesca's speech that is surprising to many readers. To many others, it is not surprising after all. Dante, as I said, was deeply moved by the eloquence of Francesca's speech about love, to the point of even losing his consciousness. I swooned away as if I had been dying, and fell, even as a dead body falls. So he fainted and fell on the ground before he was awakened by Virgil. It is very important here to make distinction between two Dantes, Dante the poet and Dante the character. Dante the poet is the Dante who wrote and published the Divine Comedy. This is quite self-evident. On the other hand, Dante the character is the main character in the poem and the protagonist who embarked together with Virgil on a journey through hell, the purgatory, and heaven. Dante the character is naive, is easily deceived by the surfaces of things. He easily believes the characters he encounters in hell. The characters who tried to persuade him that they are not responsible for their actions, and they are in hell just because they are victims, and characters who tried to gain his sympathy, and this is quite clear in his reaction to Francesca, as we saw. Dante the poet, on the other hand, is somebody who is knowledgeable, who knows the truths and the reality of things. Somebody who knows the ins and outs of all of these characters. As Dante the poet knows the Dante the character. It is he who created Dante the character, and he knows for sure that these people are here because they deserve to be here. God's justice is absolute, and God does not make mistakes, and does not cannot wrong these people, and cannot put them in the wrong place. So this brings me to the end of this presentation, and I leave you with this question. The Divine Comedy reflects the medieval Christian worldview. Give some examples. Thank you for your attention.